Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to this second session on democratic resilience in light of the 2024 EU elections. So we've heard a great deal in the previous session about the importance of parties and particularly their role both in national parliaments and also in the European Parliament. And now we have an opportunity to talk with some of the people on the sharp end of the dilemmas around democracy which have been brought up in the 3D project, namely the four of the Secretary Generals of the European parties. And we're going to move into a bit more detail and some of the operationalizable conclusions from the first session. I'll just recap briefly some of the points from the first session for the benefit of those who've joined later and couldn't hear it online, and also just to kind of raise in our participants' minds some of the key questions. So we had a very interesting discussion about definitions of democratic resilience, starting with the idea from Sergio Fabbrini that resilience is about rapid adaptation, the capacity to absorb shocks. And he went on to say that a political system, a democratic system, is resilient on the basis of voters' willingness to support the system and elites. Now, that can be tricky, and there was then a discussion about the articulation between differentiated integration and democratic representation, and the conditions under which and the political systems in which differentiated integration can be at odds with or needs to be adapted for democratic, which democratic representation needs to be adapted. And then there was a very interesting discussion about how the EU is configured as a political system, the importance of electoral turnout, questions about treaty reform, capacity building for the EU, so the EU as a political system. Now, the good news for you as European parties is that there were a number of conclusions that there is no democracy without a strong parliament. Yeah, that was very much a Freudian slip. No democracy without a strong parliament, and also the need for a strong European Parliament as well as national parliaments. National parliaments are not enough on their own, although they are essential, critical to the system. A very interesting comment from Chris Lord that because national parliaments are fully occupied with scrutinising and holding national executives to account, they can't do that job also for what's going on at EU level. There also needs to be expertise and a consistent following of issues and files in the European Parliament in order to hold the EU to account. So there were lots of other very interesting points, but I'll just leave it there so you have a broad sense of it, particularly because I now want to come on to your own practical experience and the debates within your own parties about democratic resilience. And to start with the question of what's the single most important component of democratic resilience? We heard the views of academics and researchers and research projects on this question. But from your own political experience and seeing the way that things work in your own parties, what's the single most important component? Thanasis, perhaps we can start with you.
Thank you. Is this okay? Doesn't sound okay. Yeah. That's true. Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I also perhaps should have said this is Thanasis Bakolas, the Secretary General of the European People's Party. So.
Thank you. I think all of us, our starting point as political parties has to do with the lead candidate process. This is something that our political parties, everybody who's here today, has committed to. And we've committed to this imperfect system, a system that has had its problems, because it is at least a half step forward towards bringing what's happening at the EU level to our member states, to our countries. and taking some responsibility about what is going to happen next, who will be in charge of the purse, who will be in charge of the legislative and regulatory process, how will the dynamics develop, you know, it's, I think, for all of us, a challenge, because at least I would have hoped that at this stage, at least, we would have a fundamental agreement about this campaign process, the lead candidate, and we would be able to move forward. So bringing the campaign to the people, to the member states, is what we want, and we share that, I think, completely, all of us. The question is, are we doing enough? Are we moving fast enough? Because we have a very important opportunity. In the past 4 years, we've seen Europe matter. It mattered when it came to the pandemic and common vaccinations. It mattered economically in the post-pandemic period with the recovery fund. Young people, above all, and all citizens are recognizing that this thing can work to our benefit.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to come to you next, Giacomo Filibeck, Secretary General of the Party of European Socialists. So there we had view that the Spitzenkandidat process is the most important component of democratic resilience. Would that be your view as well, or would you nominate something else?
I would say, first of all, that to reduce all the facets of democracy to be strengthened, therefore to have a resilient democracy to one single component is a Herculean exercise, and I'm not that strong for this. In the context of the European election, I definitely share the position of my colleague from the EPP, Thanasis, claiming that the Spitzencandidate, the lead candidate, is definitely a tool to promote more democracy, therefore more participation, more inclusivity, more engagement of citizens into this democratic exercise, which is the election of the European Parliament and everything that comes with it. But before getting into that, I would maybe try to allow myself to be a bit more philosophical, if you want, since you have just completed the debate with academics, which I'm not going to compete at all, because I lack the basic education to do so. But if you really want to encapsulate in one notion the resilience of our democratic system, then I would say that mutual trust is a fundamental component of the whole game, meaning that we are exposed in our democratic, because we still believe in democracy and we live in democracies, so I call it democratic open debates, to a lot of players that mystify reality, that blatantly lie and create what goes under the heading of fake news, pretending that they are real news. Well, the most important factor that fights it back is to have a political system that is based on mutual trust. I can disagree strongly with a lot of policies that the EPP, the Liberals, or our Green friends are putting in place, but we have a sort of trust in each other's positions. We don't share them, but we trust that we are doing it on the basis of our own elaboration, our own political ideals, our own values. The tragedy is when this trust goes down, because the whole debate is polluted by lies, by fake news, by the fabrication of a mystified reality that kills it. And this is, for me, a very important component today. We are on the 4th of July today. To quote Lincoln, we want to stay in a system that is made of the people, by the people, for the people. The people has to be at the center of this exercise, and they need to trust into the system itself, and they need to trust one another. That goes down, we are lost.
System, and we'll come back, in fact, shortly to this issue about disinformation and the role it plays in trust. But I'd like her to come now to the ALDE views on this from Diederik de Schratzen, who's the Secretary General ad interim of the ALDE party. It is true, it's very reductionist to ask what might be the single most important component of democratic resilience. It's really to get at what you think are the absolutely key issue in terms of resilience at this point. So what would it be for you? Would it be a systemic factor like mutual trust, or would it be an institutional factor like the Spitzenkandidat?
Here I'm going to respond first with a compliment, but it follows with a but. Last time I was here was one event Bruegel had organized, which was a debate ahead of the European elections around economic issues. Very specific, a little bit of a nerdy economically interested audience, but it was and there were some operational, that's where you could see some real differences between the candidates there. Good points there. Then on one element, and if you want, on the democratic resilience, first of all, I find the term a bit complex. I was addressing this with my kids, first of all, to understand what I really meant with democratic resilience. But also there's the element of, I don't think it's either a Spitzenkandidat concept. I really like the trust dimension, guacamole, on that. That's really something. For example, what you need is you need to show to the Europeans that they're being listened to. So there is a transparency dimension that is really important. But there is also the showing the different voices. So this is one part where we have to be a bit more careful. I'd like to clarify that for all other debates in the past, we always insisted to make sure everybody was invited of the political families. But this is something that would help us, because I'm sure there are points where we disagree, but there are also points where we like to take discussions. And there are some voices of the Europeans now that are not around the table. And I think that's one element that will help. We don't shy away from debates. And this is something that will help having people that they feel represented, that they feel, look, at least where am I if I'm very anti-European? And so I think that is also part of the components. So to sum up, it was a bit of a long response, but the element of a lead candidate is creating a European sphere. It's definitely part of the solution. I love the fact you said it's imperfect. Usually I'm the only one saying it's imperfect, but here you're really right, it's imperfect, but we like it. I love the element of trust. Trust goes with transparency, etc., and that is an element we'll have to build. And then basically what I'm adding, so I'm not is to say that there's the element of making sure that the Europeans are represented, but that they are at all with its diversity, making sure youth, civil liberties are represented. And that is also maybe a third element to answer your question on resilience, is to make sure it represents all Europeans.
Thank you very much. So, Benedetta De Marte of the European Green Party, as Secretary General, when you look across the history of the EU and the way that democracy has functioned at EU level, national level, what would be the most important factor in democratic resilience?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation and for this important debate 1 year ahead of the European elections. Of course, it's very relevant, especially in a moment where we see that the trust of citizens in democratic institutions is going down. So I think it's important for us as European political parties to very much ask ourselves, and not only when it comes to European democracy, but also when it comes to democracy as a whole, what are the elements that can build resilience for the future? And I was thinking about it a lot as well, because indeed we are not academics, so of course it required a little bit of thinking, and the end of my reflection, of course, there is a lot of things that have been said that I fully agree with, but to add on also on the principle of representativity, I think that this is where we need today to put the accent when it comes to European democracy. So today, I think, as Thanasis was saying, we are in a moment where the European project has showed that it can respond to crises, emergencies, that it can play a role in the life of citizens in a very concrete way. But we are at a crossroads now, because we need to decide if we want to deepen this project. We want to make it more democratic, more connected to citizens, or we want to go back, like somebody wants, who is not here today for sure, but is gonna be represented in the next European Parliament strongly, like the Conservatives, want to go back to a Europe of national interest. So where the democratic aspect of the institution is very much weakened, the direct relationship with the citizens is gone, because this is what, for example, Meloni wants when she says, the migration pact has failed because of Hungary and Poland being against or opposing in a second step. And why did they do that? Because of their national interest. And this is right that they did it. So this shows what kind of Europe these parties want. They want a Europe of national interest, which is counterintuitive and countering whatever the project that we want is, yeah? So Europe which is more integrated, where the democratic aspect, where the legitimacy of the European Parliament, the strength of the link between citizens and their representatives is much more direct. This is why we have been advocating not only for the Spitzenkandidaten, but for transnationalists for ages, which is a thing that would really, really strengthen this link, because people would be able to vote directly for their representatives, so not for the representatives of their own country, but for their own representatives in the European Parliament. So I think that in that sense, representativity very well summarizes. If people feel much more represented in the European institutions, and they feel that there is a real democratic aspect, that they can contribute directly, they can participate, another element, very important, participation, then we make a step further and not a step in direction of a Europe of national interests.
Okay, and so if we want to do that, not to have a Europe of national interests, although in the previous session, actually, there was quite a discussion about the need to relate national interests and European interests. But one of the big factors that we've seen in recent national as well as European elections is the issue of disinformation, which Giacomo raised already, and the way that it can undermine democratic debate by bringing onto the agenda issues which may simply not have a factual basis, distorting issues, and bringing disinformation both about the EU and its policies as well as about what's going on in the world, frankly. And we've seen the way that there have been recent research, for example, on the same channels that we used to promote anti-vax now being used to promote Russian views on the war, for example. So I'm interested to know how your parties intend to try and deal with this in the upcoming campaign for the European Parliament elections due in June next year, and particularly what kind of plan you have, what kind of to deal with digital manipulation, how to whether you expect new forms of digital manipulation, deep fakes, for example, to influence the election, and what kind of action you could take against it. So Benedetta, perhaps we could start with you this time, because you went the last time.
Yes, you raise absolutely a very, very important issue that we had a debate last week among Secretary Generals of the European political parties, was raised also there, and that worries us all, I think, in a very big way. Of course, there is a lot of opportunities that comes from us from digital communication and digital means, but we are also aware very much of the risk of disinformation. We have seen also the impact it has had in some national campaigns already, also outside of the European Union, but also inside of the European Union. We are very strong supporters of legislation that has been proposed in this last legislation, in this last legislature, and of course we see that the Digital Services Act, but also the Special Committee on Foreign Interference, they are taking steps. Of course, this is always too slow. It's impossible to only have an approach that sanctions, that is sanctionatory. You need an approach that at the same time puts a very strong accent on education. Of course, this is never an easy, because it's a long process, but it's important in a lot of member states, and I think the European Union there could really contribute a lot to promote these programs. You can see that there is very school programs that have at their center also the capacity for kids to make a difference between fake and real news, for example. So these are, of course, long-term structural ways. The role of media is absolutely important in this. Media, we see it in some countries, is very prone also to share this information very often, unfortunately, because they very often don't have the means even to have the so we are working on also there, trying to make sure that we, for example, on our channels only share information from very trustable sources that have absolutely no doubt of being fake. So there is a number of things. It's not an easy topic. We expect that there will be some attempts to use especially deep fakes and artificial intelligence as well to produce fake news or disinformation. I think that as European political parties, we all will engage to fight this together and condemn this when we see it also in relation to other parties. That's for sure the case for the European Greens. And then we will see. Now it's still an early stage of these new technologies, so we hope that we can have an impact which is not too big on democracy itself, but for sure we are committed to change this in the future, yeah.
Thank you. So, Diederik, from Aldi's point of view, how to, and also I'm curious just to know what kinds of disinformation you expect to come up, whether you've done any work on this.
Well, we already have a problem, all four of us, which is that we're not allowed to lie. If we can, faced with people that say that you will get 350 billion a day if you leave the EU, or that there are millions, hundreds of millions of migrants that are out there just to take your job, we have only as an option is to come back with facts. And we either at best case become a bit boring, or we start to work on their narrative instead of what we want to do. So it is a real complexity. This is, by the way, even though I said it's important to extend the debate, that's a difficulty we'll get, right? When you have to go with facts. So basically we had three approaches. One is more ex ante. It was before this is coming. We've already been pooling some of our parties and seeing, look, what are your techniques that you do? Mostly on social media, how do you respond? So that was one element. We trained our parties. During the campaign, we have a bit of a double strategy. One is indeed, we anticipated some deepfakes, some comments, so we've made up some scenarios. What will happen if they say that? And so we prepared a bit of a comm strategy to prove our points. But also we'll assign a profile that will really work on getting facts, so that we can, and that we don't have to, in a debate, be the only one correcting the elements, but that we can try right after to say, look, this is it. We didn't go into details, but there's not 150 million people going for Giacomo's job. And so let's try to clarify those things. And I think that is the element of strategy that we see. So to sum up, we worked a bit before, and we have for the campaign a double strategy. We try to anticipate a response, but also to have a fact-finding profile that could respond, if not directly, at least provide information, the correct information after.
Okay, so fact-checking and correct information, is it going to be enough, Giacomo? I mean, you raised this issue of how much it undermines democratic debate when disinformation is insidiously reaching the population, and of course in different ways, through different means and in different countries in different ways. So it's also quite hard to know sometimes what disinformation is reaching people.
I would say that everything is useful to counteract it. The phenomenon itself is based on this capacity of these new technologies to produce this kind of environment, this new ecosystem. The problem is not the new technology per se. What we should always be afraid is old technologies, not new technologies. So new technologies are to be welcome. As well as a usual quote is that we are not afraid of artificial intelligence, we are afraid of human stupidity. But when artificial intelligence bet on human stupidity, then it's when you have the perfect storm that is hitting our society. So I think an important component for this democratic debate to take place in the proper manner, participatory, inclusive, free, open, transparent, is also that you need to have a media system that allows this to happen in the proper way, because it's not our job to do the fact-checking. Our job is to present our policy proposals. It's obviously based on the way we view the reality, and on that we build our manifesto. We will have a lead candidate that will present his or her vision for the next mandate of the European Commission and so on. But what you need is that you need a strong backbone of the media industry that allows the debate to be a clean one. What we see is that in some countries, this is not happening even internally within the European Union system. The EU Media Freedom Act is an important component of the level of health inside our own European Union. But I'm sorry to spoil the party. We have problems within the European Union membership. If you see the media concentration in a country like Hungary and the way the political power in place abuse the system of information in order to practically kill a democratic debate within their society, then you see that you are physically impaired to fight it back, because you are confronting yourself with a powerful machinery that doesn't leave a lot of air to breathe to opponents and to adversaries. So it's a common fight that we should all of those political forces that believe in the fundamental values of the European democracy should ally over that and not try to play games in order to gain a little bit of tactical support from those forces that instead do not believe in the same values and system. This is a very light way to say and invite our friends of the EPP to be very, very careful when engaging in cooperating and working with radical right-wing parties that do not want to play according to the same rules of the game that we advocate for. You see what is happening in Spain today. Pedro Sanchez said it very clearly. In 20 days, we may bring Spain 20 years backwards. It's the news of yesterday that in Cantabria, and in a village, a new Ayuntamiento, a new municipality run by Vox and PP, have decided to withdraw from a cinema show, a cartoon called Lighthouse. I don't want to make publicity on Lighthouse. I mean, I didn't even watch the movie, because there is a scene of two female characters kissing each other. It's a cartoon. Now, if we start like this, and then you don't know what you find at the end of the road. So it's complicated. It's a fight, but it's an existential fight for what we believe the European Union should be based on.
So, Thanasis, what are your views on this whole issue of disinformation? Because this is something that can happen from many different sources. Outside the EU, we know very clearly, and the EU institutions have all set up units to look at the question of disinformation coming from outside the Union. But then there's also within the Union. What do you think are the role of the parties in this, and how to guard against it?
Well, if we have a sophisticated and serious disinformation campaign at the European level, it means that we're doing something right, in the sense that it means that we're actually having a European campaign on the issues that matter beyond our member states. And that's not exactly what we're having right now. We're going into European elections next year. And the reality is that in most countries, this will be an opportunity to discuss national issues. In other countries, it will be an opportunity to have a referendum. And that's not what the European elections are all about. So I think one thing we are doing at the EPP is looking at our member parties and looking at our leaders and asking them to conduct a real European campaign. I mean, you have opportunities to conduct national campaigns in other ways or forms. I come from Greece. Up until last year, I was a member of the government. I asked my prime minister that, when it comes, and we have municipal elections in the fall, and then European elections in next June. I mean, this is an opportunity for us as Greeks to make a real difference and commit to talking about European issues. The other thing we are doing is we're heavily invested with all the stakeholders within our political family to be a part of the party's manifesto ahead of the elections. And this is a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, this is something you really have to work hard at doing, and not the opposite. I mean, you would expect that everybody would want to put their 2 cents in and gain their positions, even if they're nationally oriented positions, to a European manifesto. No, we have to make the effort and we have to push. But this is not a theoretical exercise from our point of view. What we're going to be asking our member parties that are going to participate in elections, in the European elections next June, is that we're able to agree on something. And that's something to be prevalent in their campaigns, to be on their websites, to have people talking about it, to push the campaign on European issues. Are we going to succeed? I hope we succeed partially. To begin with, yeah.
Just to clarify, so you mean that there would be one common theme that all of the EPP
that we would have that we can agree on a one-pager, at least that expresses our fundamental beliefs as a political party, as a political family, as well. There are other things that need to be done as well. Who do our leaders pick to represent us at the European Parliament? We have exceptional members from national delegations in the European Parliament. Every country has people that are just absolutely great, we know that, but there are also people that are appointed to the European Parliament, are given the opportunity to be to go there, that could be questioned. Our member parties have a stake at this, have a responsibility. They have a responsibility to make the elections about Europe, and they have a responsibility to pick candidates for the European Parliament that want to do the job. That's how you strengthen the Parliament. That's how you strengthen the debate. And that's how you address, ultimately, disinformation. Because having a debate on the issues will allow you to address disinformation in a better way, because you're going to have disinformation no matter what. to have good people who know about the issues, present, debating, going out, running for their posts, is a better way to address this information. So I think, you know, unfortunately, in quotes, we have to start from the basics and insist on the basics in order to address new challenges.
Let me complement just what Francis was saying, because I fully agree. We have a role as political parties ourselves to perform in order to make sure that all goes fine. At the same time, politically, we should all be allied in seriously introducing a regulation for the way this new technology can be used by ill-intentioned players to pollute our democratic debate. So the EU AI Act is part of this equation. And if this game in town is not regulated, then the town, for the way we know it, may look very different in a little while. And this, seriously, is a responsibility for all of us who want to preserve the way the European Union democratic system works.
Oh. Yeah.
Really quickly.
Briefly, and then I'll come back to the
Yeah, because we care about who comes, right? And we care about who is represented in the parliament. And what we fear most are the extremes. There's no question about that. And, you know,
yes, and that's I mean, I want to come on to
well,
this.
I want to answer his question about
Okay, briefly.
Spain. You know, I think the first thing that we need to do, amongst ourselves at least, is stop these culture politics. You know, good, bad, ethical, not unethical, white, black, because that's what the populists do. We cannot do it within our ranks as well. And I think if you know, let's talk about the issues, let's debate, let's disagree as hard as we can, but let's leave labels out of it. Because all our parties, the parties that are represented here on this stage, at least, I think their democratic credentials should not and cannot be questioned.
Do you want to come on in on
Well,
this, Benedetta?
I think we
Indeed.
can continue calling the blacks, yeah? So, fascists are fascists. Far right is far right. We are not gonna call it something else, yeah? So, on this, I think, and I hope this is the message I get also from Thanasis, that we are all gonna call them like they are, yeah? So, I think it's not a question of good or bad, it's a question of who stands for the same values as we stand, despite, of course, you know, varying in terms of degrees of commitment to one or another policies and so on, but who stands behind pro-democratic, pro-European strong values and who doesn't. And those who don't, I'm sorry, but we're gonna still call them off.
Would that be?
Yeah.
But you know,
also those who
but that,
collaborate.
but that, with that comes a high degree of responsibility about who you call off, because it's easy to slip. It's easy to attach yourself on any issue and say, "Look at this guy. He's veering somewhere where he's not supposed to be." That's the problem.
Diedrich, how would you handle this?
Let's just agree on not banning cartoons of women kissing. No, look, let's move this debate a bit. I think we agree on the elements that we know what our enemy is, but indeed, the core values and what you defend is very easy to define. And so the civil liberties is things that is so obvious for us to defend that, yes, we will pick a fight with Vox, with people that deal with Vox on these things. We will pick issues. So that is easy to defend. So at least our core values, we know where they stand. And it's something we will fight for and call fascists, and call black. and called white.
And we do actually have a legal basis for this in Articles 2 and 6 of the treaty, which spell out what are the EU's
That
values.
was super specific. I was about to mention Article 2. I don't have the article numbers, but I confirm it's in there, yeah.
Yes, and I mean, what's spelled out in those articles are media freedom, a key issue that Giacomo was mentioning earlier as part of the substantive qualities of democracy. It's not just procedural democracy, it's also substantive. Media freedom is part of that. But also, there's gender equality, there's respect for and protection of minorities, there's also respect for sexual orientation. So there's quite a lot there. But the problem is, of course, these are not substantiated into an acquis démocratique in terms of secondary law, the way that the single market principles are, for example. We have a partial agenda at EU level. So I think this might be one of the key reasons why we still have a lot of debate, and it's possible to veer quite far, as we've seen in some of the member states, into territory which is far beyond Articles 2 and 6. But I want to come on to another issue of political cleavages, because elections are supposed to be all about choices that voters make, and there's a lot about this in the 3D project, how to give voters meaningful choices, and particularly choices between policies. Now, one of the things that's happened over the past 10 years with the rise of populism at the extremes of politics has been moving from politics based on policy choices to politics based on identity issues. But it's quite a flexible agenda of identity issues, what counts as an identity issue. We've had a lot recently on the values issues, but we've had migration has come up again and again as the key wedge issue that identity-based parties use as a means of beating all elites, a means of raising mistrust in elites, raising mistrust also in political systems. But now we seem to be having a new kind of wedge issue, which is, perhaps we could call it the green wedge, which is that, you know, none of the parties that you are representing actually deny that climate change is happening, deny that there should be a green agenda. All four of your parties and your constituent parties at national level accept that climate change is happening, it's human-caused, and it needs to be tackled. Then, of course, there are a lot of differences and a lot of debate about how to do that, how fast and in what ways and so on. But we do see climate denial arising in parties which may well garner a lot of votes and therefore quite a few seats in the next European Parliament. We could see quite a big contingent of climate deniers in the next legislature. So how to manage this? How do you think that the green agenda will influence the process of putting together political programs ahead of the elections as you look at what manifestos to put out? So Thanasis was talking about having common issues for all of the EPP parties. How will the green issues be handled? And I just remind you that in 2019, the European Parliament elections in that year produced quite a green wave and pushed basically all of the mainstream parties towards a much stronger green agenda. I think Frans Timmermans put it, he said, all parties are green parties now, which might have seemed a bit scary for the European Green Party at the time, but there seems to be plenty of scope now for coming back on these issues. So, but do you think that the European Green Deal and the enormous progress that's been made during this term of the institutions, is it in jeopardy? Will it become a new political football? Will it become a major cleavage, in your view? Is it something that could really actually perhaps make the difference between the parties that are debating policy choices and the parties that are debating identity? Diederik, do you want to start on that?
Well, we've got a bit of an inside joke there, is who killed the Green Deal? How did it happened well in council by a very young Swedish minister, 27-year-old, who managed to get an agreement, but then got with a difficult situation in agri, in fish, in EVI, is where the legislation, well, didn't pass. Look, the reality is that it sounds a bit like a cliche, and I hope that we'll have to build on the trust that, but we really are thinking that the elements of innovation, of the involvement of SMEs, of not letting anybody behind, together with environmental results, is possible. So there is a bit of a discussion on environment, which is something that really touches people, is that you either have to go left or right, and there is a midway where we can assure this, and this is really something we believe in strongly, and I think we'll get there, because you are right to say there are some people that are denying climate, but let's be realistic, that's that becomes a minority now. And indeed, I don't want to quote Frans Timmermans, but there is an element that at least engagement and the reality that it's important is starting to spread all over. That doesn't make them green. I'm not sure we want to be green, but it does show that this is an important issue. And we didn't do it to please anyone nor the audience, but in our manifesto, this is a big point, and it is being addressed. And that is not to cater the need, because it's really something most of our parties really care about too. Just want to highlight that in no particular case, in some the north of Europe, our political family is viewed as the environmentalist. I'm thinking in Sweden, Finland, etc. So that's not all over Europe, but it's really widely spread in our organization, and we go for the middle track.
Oh, I have to quote the Belgian Prime Minister, a liberal, who said that there should be a pause. And we've heard this kind of language also from some of the constituent parties of the European People's Party. So, Thanasis, how do you think that your national parties are going to put forward their manifestos on the green agenda?
I think for us at the EPP, there's no question that we are committed to the policies that we've all supported. But, you know, we need to face up to a reality. You know, these policies are long-term policies, and in order for them to be ultimately successful, we have to have the people behind us. And sometimes, you know, we need to be able to rethink and adjust not our priorities, not our commitment, but if, you know, a certain segment of the population in European member countries are suffering, you know, not by faulty design necessarily, but, you know, we just came out of a pandemic. We just, you know, the war in our continent is still here. You know, the ability to adjust shows proper political leadership. It's one thing to deny, it's one thing to change your mind, it's another thing to adjust. So I'm pretty confident that the parties that I represent will take that stance as we approach the European Parliament elections.
Is there time for a pause? Is it time to adjust and let people catch up?
I would say it's not. First of all, I want to respond to a piece of disinformation, just to stay in theme, which would be that people are not behind us. People are so much behind the green transformation. I was looking at the numbers of the last Eurobarometer. 86% of European citizens are either very much in favor or in favor of boosting renewable. 85% energy efficiency. 84% reduce dependency from Russia, obviously. 84% reduce imports of oil and gas and invest in renewables. 81% want to have made steps to reduce their own consumption. Because another very important data that we have is that people are willing to take steps if they see institutions, governments taking steps as well, private sectors taking steps as well. So the people are behind us, because I think also who is not behind wanting to live in a place where their life is not at risk because of floods? Which farmer doesn't want to, because we were talking about farmers last week in the nature restoration law, which farmer doesn't want to have security about the water supply that they have? I mean, people are in favor of the green transformation. So I think that what is very dangerous is fostering this narrative that we need to slow down because people don't want the green transformation. No, there are big corporate interests that are against the green transformation. This is true, but a majority of people, citizens, a majority of SMEs who, as I was saying earlier, need security of their investments. They need to know what their future is going to look like. institutions, local actors, they want the green transformation because they know this is our only option to survive. So I think here it's very dangerous to play with this argument also that some are hinting at in this beginning of the campaign, that the reasons why inflation is rising is due to the green transformation and to the Green Deal and to the green agenda. That's not true. We also know this. There is a massive part of the inflation that is due to greedflation, so which is increase of prices that are completely beyond also what have been the increase of energy prices during the Ukraine crisis and so on. So of course there is cost that we will have to sustain, and of course the Greens are in favor of having these costs paid by not the citizens, and by managing the transformation in a way that is socially desirable and that is just. So making sure that actors who are at risk of losing their job, for example, they can benefit from having educational programs that can convert their skills into skills that are adapted to a new world when it comes to economic skills and job skills and so on. But we need to do it. And I think there has been in this legislature a very wide agreement and a very wide majority for this. And this is why the Green Deal is proceeding. And to stop it now, or to stop some parts of it because of the campaign, because we want to, as you say, go behind those who want to make of the climate crisis and the green transformation a wedge topic, it's a big mistake. Because the citizens are behind us in this. And I think they will show it also in the next European elections, hopefully.
How does it look to you, Giacomo, from the point of view of the socialists?
So I had the honor of being one of the campaign manager of Franz Timmermans in 2019 when he was running as a lead candidate for the socialist, social democratic family of PES. And I want to reassure Benedetta, the Greens are the Greens. Nobody wants to replace the Greens. But the reflection that we had during that campaign with France is that either the European Union as a project was going to become the front runner in this transformational mission of contributing structurally to saving the planet with everything that it implies, or the same very project of the European Union itself was somehow going to be very less appealing to the new generation of European citizens. So we built big part of the campaign of France in interacting with the younger generation to make sure that they would understand with us and ourselves understanding from them the preoccupation of the youngest sector of our society for the future sustainability of our life on this planet. And that was translated into a major component of this, of the mandate of the European Commission that goes under the name of Green Deal. If it was not for Franz Timmermans, if it was not for PES, the Green Deal per se, that informs big part of the action of the mandate of Ursula von der Leyen, would have not been there. And not because I'm disrespecting our friends from the Greens, but simply because the weight that our party manages to get at the last European election and the performance that Timmermans deployed over that campaign managed to provoke that kind of environment. And I do not question for 1 second the political, democratic and pro-European credentials of EPP. I want to reassure Thanasis because there is no sense in doing this. As I said before, mutual trust is at the basis of our cooperation. But it is clear to everyone following what happens in the Brussels bubble that there is a real debate within the EPP when it comes to how to tackle this last mile of the Green Deal operation. And the third pillar being the nature restoration law and its approval next week in Strasbourg will mark a divide before and an after. If it doesn't go through, and it doesn't go through because of the EPP withdrawing from their commitment to the Green Deal as such, then we will have to draw consequences out of this political choice, because it's a choice. Now, doing this siding with those more populistic and corporative approaches that exist in Europe. We are part of democracy. We are a democratic system, so everyone can defend their own interest. But to do this at this stage in time, it is, in our opinion, a tragic mistake. And we will continue to point it out anytime, all the time, until the very end of the full package to be hopefully approved. But we have to be clear on one thing, because I like the Eurobarometer results. I fully trust that there is a sentiment, a majority sentiment within the European population for saying, yes, we have a mission, and our mission can be really to be on the front line to save our life on this planet. But I definitely know, because we found out already back in 2019 while campaigning, that when you promote such a transformational process to citizens, you are going to provoke some anxiety and fears. So what Thanasis is saying is not an invention of the EPP Secretary General. It exists. There are fears and anxiety. And this is why we propose, since the beginning, next to the Green Deal, being an integral part of the Green Deal, measures and tools that would alleviate this kind of fears and anxiety. The Just Transition Fund, the Social Climate Fund, and all measures possible that would, from the side of the European Union, help those sectors in our society that need protection vis-à-vis this process. In a formula, and that shows again that we are not transforming all into green parties. The Green Deal functions and is successful only if it has a red heart. And the red heart is what we are going to put forward in order to make this transition successful. If the transition is not going to be just, the transition will not work. This is it.
Okay, I'm looking forward to the new logo for the PES campaign of the red heart of the Green Deal. You heard it here first, okay? Breaking news at Bruegel. Over there, blue sky. Okay. Or we're gonna, yes, all the colours can be brought in there.
Besides black, everything is allowed.
Can I come 1 second on this? First of all, I want to precise one thing, that the Greens are not looking for exclusivity on this. We believe that the reason why we do politics is to achieve this agenda. So the more this is mainstreamed across other parties, the happiest we are. We don't do this with the aim of being the ones, and also we know that this also reflects in our political success, because we were the ones in 2008 to campaign on a Green Deal, and then in 2019 this took place, and there was a majority for it. So we built this together with the others. So I want to be very clear on this. There is no exclusivity, because what we are doing this for, it is to advance this agenda. It is to really change the economy. Also, I want to say that, I fully agree with everything that Giacomo said on the need for the transformation to be just. Otherwise, of course, we would leave people behind, which is absolutely not in our political project. I also want to answer to something that I forgot earlier about our manifestos. Of course, this will have a huge weight in our manifesto. It will inform the whole manifesto, because this is part of our DNA. And our whole manifesto will be indeed shaped around the need to conciliate the two agendas, yeah, the social and the climate agendas, and this will inform and informs the way in which we look at all other policies, yeah. So the green project is a very organic one in that sense. We have also, when it comes to our trade policies, foreign policies and so on, everything is very much informed by the need of entailing this transformation.
Thank you for that clarification. Yes, and I also, as we enter the next phase of the European Green Deal, when it comes into national implementation, I think we can expect to see a lively debate among parties also at national level on how to bring together green with social, but also green with competitiveness, green with transformation of the economy towards a clean tech economy. So I think we can already see some, I think the audience can see some distinctions between the views of different parties on this. So I think this is a very helpful clarifying debate. So we're now open for your questions, and also the online audience, you are very welcome to ask a question using Slido. So you can see the link and also the hashtag for this debate in the invitation to this event and your confirmation email. So please send your questions via Slido, and I'll put them to the panel. And of course, those in the room get the first chance to ask a question. Go ahead. There should be a microphone just there behind you. Go ahead, and please remind us who you are.
Thank you. Alexander Lungarov, formerly with the European Economic and Social Committee and currently at Institute for International Law at KU Leuven University here in Belgium. You mentioned disinformation, you mentioned media, so maybe about information. Information usually is conveyed by means of a language, and in Europe there are 24 official languages at EU level, many more or a deal more within EU member states. So how do you think about European democracy, representativity, when a debate is hard to conduct in more than 20 languages at the same time? Yeah. And this situation leads to European politicians and national politicians to present things for their same language-specific audience. Thank you.
Okay, and that, of course, relates directly to the whole question of the Spitzenkandidat process and whether it's possible. Anyway, we'll come to that. You feel free to take it up as you'd like to. I'm just going to take two questions and then I'll come back. And feel free to pick and choose the questions. You don't all have to answer every question, because I think we've got quite a few people who want to come in. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Wolfgang Pape. I'm studying multi-level governance, and I have the feeling we have to distinguish democracy for its different stages. You can be very direct at local level. Everybody knows directly what's happening in the neighborhood. They don't need the media, for instance. But the higher you get already at national, in particular at EU, and even at global level, you need more expertise, and representation is getting more and more difficult. Dare I say that even the European Parliament has problem linking with the people. I don't say peoples, but with the people of Europe. That's one of the issues. That's why I feel more and more we need expertise at higher level. And this expertise at the EU is mainly coming from the Commission, and the Parliament sometimes lacks this expertise. And there I miss one word here, that is civil society. We see particularly in climate issues, COP process and all that, where civil society has enormous impact on the expertise. It is necessary. The national representative of the 193 countries in COP decide formally at the end, but the real substantive views are brought in by civil society. And I wonder what is the role of civil society here among the parties. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for getting the question. Okay, so languages and what's the role of civil society?
Well, I want to distinguish one thing. Is that first of all, there's the elements of the lead candidates. Go on the language element, as you can see. And there we had big discussions, especially on the Eurovision debates, because one of the participants really wanted to have it in their home language. So I think we have to separate the elements. First of all, when it is for the lead candidate, which is still a little bit of an EU bubble element, it's a regretful, but Until one of us is going to run with a pop star like Adele, we will have profiles that are not known over the whole continent. So let's start at least these debates. There was really an important, none of them was native English speakers. And so this really helped to have that debate in English, but it was translated in all other languages, dubbed and subtitles for everyone. However, so that's for the lead candidate part of our job, right? The little European part of the campaign. However, in the national one, this is where, in our case, we rely very much on our supporters that do translate our communication, do translate the sites of our pages. I'd love to say it was done in all languages, but it wasn't, because at the time we weren't running in every country. But so that is where we'll make the distinction. So if it is a debate for European political, I think it's really important we speak the same languages, because otherwise you cannot have real debates. I mean, you've seen the elements. If people speak their language, it needs to be translated. It makes it very difficult. However, it should be available in every language after, obviously, and during also, in simultaneous translation, but also for the European campaign, also grassroots, they should get the support. So this is a decision that was made and that I think we stand for.
Anybody else want to take this up?
Yeah, I mean, on languages, I very much agree with what Diederik say. For us, the accessibility of our campaign has always been at the core of our worries since the very beginning, although the limited resources. I remember in 2014, I think we translated the campaign even in Catalan, so like really we pushed ourselves quite far, because we believe this is an element of indeed accessibility, democratic accessibility, and I think we're gonna do this also this time. Of course, for debates it's harder, but I also think that yeah, people should also be allowed to debate in their own language if they wish so, although of course it's better to debate all in the same language, but I think they should be allowed for the simple reason that also there we need to make the leading candidates race accessible for different profiles, and we cannot expect that all the profiles will speak English perfectly. But I wanted to go back to multi-level governance and the role of civil society, and I mean, I'm sure I'm also a local councillor in Brussels, so I very much experiment a participative democracy every day, and I fully agree with you that this is for sure a very different kind of democracy than the one we have at the European Union level. I acknowledge the need of expertise that is needed to legislate on what the European Union legislates on, and I acknowledge, and for us Greens, the role of the civil society is not only instrumental to come up with policies that have that make full sense, but it is really like a co-construction. We rely a lot on our relations with civil society. We do a lot of work, especially from the European Green Party. In our manifesto, for example, we have already started our listening process to the civil society. So we held very early in our manifesto process a meeting with, I think, more than 50 NGOs to really talk about the different aspects. But also in our daily work, we do events to make sure that policymakers and civil society activists meet along the legislature and so on. So I very much agree with this. However, there is one element that I think is that important to underline, that even at the European level, bottom-up participation can be fostered. And to make sure that the citizens get closer to the European project, we need to do much more when it comes to participation of citizens. In that sense, the Conference on the Future of Europe was an interesting first step, but there can be much more that can be done, and it's not only through expert policy making that we are going to make this project fully democratic, I would say.
Thanatos, do you want to come in on this one, or?
Just to agree on one thing, we need to, I think that when I look at the younger generations voting, I find a lot of hope in it. Young people are interested. And I think what our commitment should be as European political parties, given our limited resources, is to work with our national parties, make this a real European campaign and engage on a grassroots level. I totally agree with you, Benedict. If we don't foster, because it's up to us to do it, you know, as European political parties, but also our national parties, if we do not foster and allow and cultivate a grassroots approach, I think this experiment will not go the way we want to.
Giacomo.
Yes.
Civil society.
On languages, I would just like to say that that this is more of a sort of ironic comment, that we had a competitive advantage last time with Franz Timmermans being able to speak 8 languages fluently and sort of seriously impressive. But we cannot bet on the fact that every lead candidate has that kind of language skills, and this is not the purpose in itself. So we need indeed, Alexander, to make sure that the language barrier, that divide, is that gap is somehow eased, and it is possible for everyone to express and understand what are the different proposals on the table. On civil society, as PES, we interact with a series of NGOs that are active on the European Union level, and we regularly invite them to contribute to our own elaboration of the manifesto. So internally, we integrate them among, if you want, a big part of our own constituency in terms of ideas, proposals, projects. We have a very regular exchange with social partners, with trade unions, and if you want to go concretely on the measures, it is with them that we fully agree that the Green Deal or the AI transformation indeed will create some jobs losses, but it can also be seen as an opportunity to create better, new quality jobs. There has to be a process of upskilling, reskilling, lifelong learning, ongoing to accompany this transformation to be successful. But it is also in the relationship with trade unions that the social democratic family promotes and advances positions that try to give the positive aspect of this age transformation in which we are living, both on the digital side and on the environmental one.
Thank you very much. So, further questions? Please. The microphone's just coming to you.
Hello. Hello, I'm Emily Tilburg from the UK mission to the European Union. Thank you very much for the discussion so far. It's been fascinating. I wanted to ask you, so in 2019, Ursula von der Leyen stated as one of her 6 policy priorities a new push for European democracy, and I think at the time that was quite sort of framed around the conference on the future of Europe. Since then, more lately, we've had the slightly ill-fated defense of democracy package, which is sort of, well, delayed, to put it kindly. I wonder, how do you feel about sort of the overall success of this area of Commission activity? And would you say that the Conference on the Future of Europe has sort of been the big bright spot of this? And is there anything else that you think sort of the Commission should be particularly thanked or sort of noted as being a success, or is there any success, in fact?
So, the role of the Commission in democracy. Now we get down into the heart of the Brussels bubble debate.
It is a bit of a different question than we usually get. I really appreciate it because we don't usually. Giacomo, a while ago, he said at one point, it's not our role to really defend fake news, etc., and I agree. It's also not our role to defend everything the EU does for every citizen, right? But we still have to do it, because we have to take that place. So I am answering partially to your question. There is a bit of a deficit of first of all, communicating the achievements of the EU, etc. We discuss this frequently. So, Conference of Future Europe is not what everybody was dreaming that it could have been, but we don't have that many alternatives. Remember that it was important for us to discuss, to get the input from the youth, from the individuals. So all I hope is that this is not a deterrent to continue exercises like this. So it is a little bit like a Spitzen. It's imperfect, but it's a great way. Well, I hope that we can find another solution similarly to that can indeed gather inputs from civil society, from youth, and so it's not because it didn't get the immediate results we wanted that we shouldn't go for another try. I think this is maybe in a different format. I don't have the answer immediately, but to put that as a priority, to try to get the input from all over Europe is a good priority, and we should not let that one go.
Any other views on Defend Democracy package?
We should not be afraid of the words treaty change. I mean,
Let's not.
no, I mean, honestly, I mean, if, this is a democratic exercise, and democratic exercise happen in the real world, and, it needs to be alive. And change is part of our existence. We cannot just say we've agreed on something. This is how we're going to go forward. No changes. Otherwise, I'm going to question your commitment to it. No. I mean, because we have so many other things that we need to fight for. Democratic issues. And we need to be open to how we change this structure. Mm-hmm. That's a good thing.
To compliment just on that one is that I really appreciate the element of treaty change. The reality is nobody in the streets requests a treaty change. They request change. Treaties have to follow. So in that order, I really think you're right.
But we're afraid. Sorry.
Let's all block.
I don't know about this apolitical statements of nobody in the street is asking for a treaty change. Yes, nobody is constitutional right experts in the street, maybe not even in this room. And if you ask the question treaty change, probably they will tell you what are you talking about, which treaty. But we know.
You do have people.
But we know. But we know, especially through the exercise of this attempt from this commission with the Conference on the Future of Europe, that at large, the civil society finding were promoting and asking for more, stronger, more integrated, more performing European Union. So it's particularly appreciated that this question comes from a UK mission representative, because first of all, it's unfortunate what has happened with Brexit, and I will never get tired of repeating it in every environment, meeting, context I am. This has been the most tragic historical mistake that a great country like the UK could have done to its own citizens. But we respect democracy, and this is it, and we have a lot of respect for the UK mission here in Brussels. But it's nice that it comes from you, the question on the future of Europe, and how do we deal with it. And definitely, we should not be afraid of treaty changes. We should not be shy in engaging in this debate in the next legislature, in the next mandate. As Social Democrats, we want to do as maximum as we can do within the current boundaries of the treaty change, so to exploit what it is there to the maximum. And once all of it is exploited to the maximum and to the benefits of our citizens, then we can also proceed for further improvement, because it's a constant evolutive process, the integration of the European Union. It's an experiment. As Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, said it in his, he said it several times, but the last time in Paris a few days ago, it's patrimonio democratico dell'umanità. That's the way he defined it. This is the Italian translation from the Brazilian one. In English would be, the democratic, a universal democratic heritage for humanity. The European Union project in itself, it is this in the eyes of the Brazilian leader. And it's a nice way to look at ourselves, because what we achieved in a few decades, it's remarkable. See what we're doing here. And I would add that the fact that we are having this kind of debates 1 year ahead of the European elections also shows that something has changed. I started doing politics 20 years ago, or even more, at the youth level. You are talking about the Convention on the Future of Europe. I was part of that convention, the one that attempted to write the constitutional treaty in 2002. I was leading the youth assembly of that convention, talking about civil society and the role that it can offer. We made our own propositions on how the European Union should look like in 50 years from there. This was the request of Valéry Giscard d'Estaing to our assembly. And I'm saying that if they would have trusted what we wrote in those 14 pages, probably in France and in the Netherlands, the referendum would have not had a no. Because we were responding more to certain anxiety of European citizens, especially in France, than the final mediation and negotiations and compromise resulted in the text of the constitutional treaty. What I'm trying to say is that we are all in a process, and this process can take a pause, can go wrong, or can go better, can go for improving. We go for the third direction, improvement.
No, just because I didn't
Yeah,
No, just I want to add one dimension. I agree with a lot of what was said, and I agree with not being fearful of treaty changes. I will add we should not be fearful of tackling unanimity and everything.
Qualified majority
and I
voting.
think here there is a lot of agreement. But I see that we will have to do all of this in next legislature also. First of all, having to do, hopefully not, but likely with governments that do not have European integration forcefully at their heart, or were part of it. Part of governments will not have further European integration at their heart, so we have to really be strong among pro-European forces here to really have to keep the compass in the right direction. But secondly, we will have to also, and let's not shy away from this, deal with this in a moment where we also have to deal with the existential question of the enlargement of the European Union. Because this is on our hands now, and we can't leave the demands for parts of Europe that are looking at us now unanswered. So we have to really thoroughly ally among ourselves to look into what needs to be done, and I think we Greens are very much willing to cooperate also with the other political parties for sure in this sense.
I'm going to come to the last two questions. There's one on Slido, and also I'd like to give Sergio, as one of the lead academics in the project, the last question. But I would just observe, as a political scientist, looking at the debate at European level, there's a remarkable degree of consensus between the four of you in the parties on several issues where the Council, the majority in the Council, has a completely different view. So just for the audience's sake, particularly those not following this very closely inside the Brussels bubble, both on this issue of treaty change, there are a number of member states which are now saying it's just never going to happen. You know, you open the Pandora's box, all of the issues have to be debated. It's too difficult to get consensus. We failed to get treaty change through referenda in France and the Netherlands and Ireland. It just can't be done. So I just note that there's a different view on that, and of course a very different view on the Spitzenkandidat lead candidate process, where the Council had a debate about this very recently, and member state governments are not in favour of running this again. So I just wish to kind of also provide a little bit of contrast. And it's very interesting because, of course, it means that there can be debates about this during the election campaign. And yeah, it's a different perspective.
And that, you know, to talk about difficult issues, right, is important. I mean, whether it's, you know, we cannot reach the position of actually talking about treaty changes unless we have these difficult conversations.
Yeah, indeed.
What the council is doing is saying no treaty change now. That's a different perspective. We're looking at, I think we're all playing the long game here, and that's why we agree, if I may.
So I have two last questions. So I have one which actually relates to something you raised earlier, Thanasis, in the very first thing you said. The question is, well, the campaign for the European Parliament elections in each member state is conducted by the national party, which it is, which often leads to discussions focused on national matters. How to overcome that and make it more European. And in the first session, there was a comment about, a point of analysis, that the way that European Parliament elections often become second-order elections can be problematic for democracy as well. So I just give you that one to think about. And in the meantime, Sergio, let me give you the very last question. The microphone's just coming to you because then people online can hear us.
Very
too.
brief question.
This is Sergio Fabrini.
A debate like this one year from now, probably you will have the European Conservative around the table.
Yes.
Would the
Yeah, they were
of
invited
course,
to join this debate.
No, my
the
question
European
is, would the European Conservative be part of the majority in the European Parliament?
Ah, so now we're thinking long term about so just to clarify the question, might the European Conservatives and Reformist Party actually be part of the governing coalition? So,
I'm happy to respond on that. I cannot predict what will happen in the composition of the next European Parliament. And again, it's a democratic competition, so we will see who gets what. But there are some very clear red lines. We, as Social Democrats, will not go beyond and cross. And exactly for what we discussed before, we call things by their names, and we don't shy away from it. Those forces that contribute to slow down Europe, to undermine the fundamental values of the European Union, that foresee a regression in terms of social and civil rights within the European Union, can never be our allies in any sort of geometric constellation inside the European Parliament. It won't happen under our watch.
it won't happen.
It won't happen. The red lines are there. And they're there not to preserve our majority. That's not the case. They're there to present, to protect the fundamental reasons why we are doing this.
So the EPP wouldn't form a coalition with the ECR, even if that created a majority in the parliament?
The question is not who we would form a majority with or which parties we would pick and choose. The question is what are our red lines today and having the same lines after the election.
Benedetta?
For sure, without us, for sure. I'm not sure I understood EPP position, so maybe we can insist with Thanasis a little bit more. For the Greens, for sure, being in a majority with the ECR is a no-go at European level, at national level, at every level, no. So that's clear for us, and not only indeed on on the basic principles of European democracy, but also on a number of other basic principles where it's impossible for us to agree or find compromises and common ground with parties like Fratelli d'Italia or Vox.
I love the fact we'll talk about majorities like if there was really already an element of signed majorities, but however, and there is a response to your question, I really think that might happen more and more. I predict, this is me personally, that there will much more be something that looks like a real majority of people signing in, agree on something. So I think that's where we're growing. This whole European campaigning is imperfect. It does not reach out yet to all individuals at European level. However, I think we're getting there, is that there will be some sort of a majority real discussion around some ideas, and that I will be open to who wants to participate to this. A little bit like we have in national situations. I'm Belgian, nobody's perfect. I'm not saying it will take us 545 days, to make a government, but it might take a bit longer than what we've used to. And I'm not excluding that we might face a post-election period that is slightly different than our usual post-election moments.
Well, there's an interesting prediction. Well, we're out of time now, so we'll have to leave it there. But I think there's a strong case to reconvene, perhaps next year, and discuss what's happened, perhaps this time next year, shortly after the election, and see what kind of majority has been formed and how long it might take actually to sort out what's happening in the Parliament. We're definitely in a moment of great political change. So thank you to all of you for a very interesting debate and for your great questions.